to the opening statements from the state, or the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
It's a time where my responsibility as representative of the Commonwealth is to give you a preview, an overview of what we expect the evidence for the Commonwealth to be in this case. First, it's my responsibility to read you the indictment. Wanton endangerment in the first degree, count 1. On or about March 13, 2020 in Jefferson County, Kentucky, the above named defendant, Brett Hankison, committed the offense of wanton endangerment in the first degree when, under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to human life, he wantonly shot a gun into an apartment occupied by C.E. initials. Count 2, wanton endangerment in the first degree. On or about March 13, 2020, in Jefferson County, Kentucky, the above-named defendant, Brett Hankison, committed the offense of wanton endangerment in the first degree when, under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to human life, he wantonly shot a gun into an apartment occupied by C.N. Count 3, wanton endangerment in the first degree. On or about March 13, 2020, in Jefferson County, Kentucky, the above-named defendant, Brett Hankison, committed the offense of wanton endangerment in the first degree when, under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to human life, he wantonly shot a gun into an apartment occupied by Z.F., signed by the foreperson. Now, as you've heard, the indictment is not evidence. It's the charge. That charge is returned by the Jefferson County Grand Jury. The evidence will be what you hear in this courtroom from the witness chair. This is not a case to decide who is responsible for the death of Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor should not have died that night. The city of Louisville, in a civil matter, which I spoke about yesterday, paid millions of dollars to Breonna Taylor's family. But the money did not bring her back. Nothing will. This is not a case about the search warrant for Breonna Taylor's apartment, other than you will hear it was a valid search warrant signed by a judge. This is not a case about the Louisville Metro Police Department as far as whether or not there needs to be reform or more support for officers who put their lives on the line every day. This is not that case. This is a case about the actions of Brett Hankison on the night of March 13, because it started about midnight, 2020. And about, as you heard, the circumstances under which he acted. You will hear that he shot into the apartment building at 3003 Springfield Drive. And you will hear that his bullets went through apartment 4 into apartment 3 and nearly hit Cody Etherton as he was walking down the hallway into the dining room of his apartment to see what was going on with the banging. This case is about Cody and his partner Chelsea, who was 7 months pregnant at the time. and their 5-year-old son, who was sleeping in the bedroom closest to the front door when the bullets ripped through the apartment and out their sliding glass door into the night. There was no search warrant for Cody and Chelsea's apartment. Exhibit 73A, or 73. This is 3003 Springfield Drive that you will hear witnesses testify about. An apartment 4 apartment 4 patio faces the parking lot. Apartment 3, which you'll see in a minute, the door that leads to apartment 3's patio is at the rear of the building. And this is apartment 3's patio through which one of the bullets shot by Brett Hankison through this patio all the way through and exited the patio doors here and into the night. You will hear from some of the officers who were there that night to serve the search warrant. You will hear that as they approached the apartment 4, which was the apartment of Breonna Taylor, they had the warrant which was signed as a no-knock warrant, Exhibit 5. This is what you will hear referred to as the breezeway, the entrance into the building. In this alcove or breezeway, there are doors to 4 apartments. This is apartment 4 that you will hear a lot of testimony about. This is the entrance into the apartment of Ms. Taylor. This is apartment 3. This is Cody and Chelsea's apartment. This door right here. This is apartment 2, and over out of the photo, which is directly across from apartment 4, is apartment 1 over here. Upstairs are 4 more apartments in the same design as the first floor. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 directly above 4. You will hear detectives who were assigned to execute the search warrant that it was, even though signed as a no-knock warrant, decided that it would be served as knock and announce. Knock and announce. And you'll see a photo that shows a large whiteboard that was displayed at the briefing earlier that day for detectives who would be serving the warrant. And on the whiteboard, you'll see the words knock and announce written above the address 3003 Springfield Drive, apartment 4. You will hear the subject of the search warrant was Breonna Taylor, who was connected to an individual named Jamarcus Glover, designated as a drug trafficking suspect. You will hear that all of the detectives who were assigned to serve the search warrant were experienced detectives, including the defendant, Brett Hankison, with approximately 20 years in law enforcement. After the briefing, you will hear, which was earlier in the day of March 12, those assigned to execute this search warrant met at a church nearby Springfield Drive called St. Anthony's Church, met in the parking lot there to discuss what the approach would be on Springfield Drive. Sergeant John Mattingly was designated to be the person, the detective at the door, along with Detective Mike Nobles, who was carrying a ram. You'll see a photograph of a ram that was ultimately used to breach the door. Other detectives: Miles Cosgrove, Mike Campbell, Tony James, and Sean Hoover. Detective Hankison was a canine officer, meaning he had a dog that was trained to sniff for narcotics, a specifically trained narcotics dog. That dog did not leave the vehicle of the defendant at any time. The protocol is the dog stays in the car until the warrant, till entry is made, search is in progress. If the dog is needed, then the dog would be retrieved from the vehicle. That did not happen here. The dog never left the car. It was approximately 11:45. Exhibit 14. Let's go to 19. This is another photo of the breezeway, and now you can see apartment 1. You can see the size of the area here is not large. Exhibit 19. This photo taken further back. This the stairs going up to the other 4 apartments on the second floor, this being 8, 7, 6, and then 5 over here. The sliding glass doors of apartment 4, and this due to the stairs, you cannot see the door to apartment 4, but it's right here. This is the sliding glass doors, and you can see the railing going around the little patio. This photo was taken the morning after, so it's daylight. But obviously, when this event occurred, it was pitch dark at midnight. You can see the shattering of the window, the glass door in these patio doors. Those are the shots that the defendant made through these doors that went all the way through into the other apartment 3 here, which mirrors apartment 4. There's a common wall between the two of them. This diagram over to your right is a floor plan of apartment 3. The front door being here, dining, kitchen, bedrooms, and here is the patio that leads out into the back of the building. So the bullets you will hear came from apartment 4, which would be down here, this is the common wall, came through the sliding door here, through the dining room wall, all the way through out the patio door of this apartment. There were 3 bullets that came through. There were 5 bullets actually shot by the defendant through the patio doors. There were 5. 3 made it through all the way into apartment 3. 1 out the patio doors of apartment 3. A 4th one stuck in the stud of this wall, of this common wall, and a 5th one that went through these doors didn't make it past the floor of this, this is apartment 3, didn't make it through the apartment 4. It was very damaged bullet. It was later determined to have been fired by Detective Hankison's gun. It was found on the floor in the dining room of apartment 4, which would be right here. They mirror each other. So it didn't make it through the wall, but nevertheless was shot through the sliding glass door. So there were 5 total bullets shot by the defendant through this door. Now, as the group of detectives approached the breezeway to execute the search warrant and had lined up in a formation with Detective Mattingly and Detective Nobles, who's the detective with the ram, at the front door. You will hear that Detective James was over by this wall. Detective Cosgrove was a little bit further back. Detective Campbell was the farthest back. Lieutenant Hoover also back in this area, as was the defendant, Detective Hankison, because there's not room in that little alcove for 7 men to stand all bunched up. So Mattingly and Nobles basically at the door. Now, once they were in position, you will hear that a gentleman came out this door, which is apartment 8, came out the door to the railing or to the top of the stairs, and you will hear from him. His name's Aaron Sarpy, who was there to pick up his daughter.
Opening statements going on in the case against Breonna Hankinson. We're slipping a commercial break, and we'll get you back into the courtroom right after this. Stay with us.
Buckle your seat.
Welcome back to Court TV Live on a busy Wednesday, where we're juggling 2 live trials, one in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. That is the Commonwealth of Kentucky versus former police officer Breonna Hankinson. We're watching opening statements there. We're going to go right back to those statements where we left off. What we're going to do is show you the entire openings. We'll just hit the old pause button so you won't miss a thing on that. And then the popcorn murder trial, we're still monitoring that. If you want to watch that, they're in a break right now, but we'll be streaming that on courttv.com, so you can watch that trial if you know, you're already into it, you want to keep watching that. But right now, let's return where we left off in the opening statements from the Commonwealth of Kentucky against former Officer Breonna Hankinson. The prosecutor is Barbara Whaley. Here we go.
Who was there to pick up his daughter from the babysitter. And he was preparing, he had come up to this apartment prior to the detective's arrival. He had already come to pick up his daughter. And actually, his white Sequoia was parked out in the parking lot behind. It was in a perpendicular. He had pulled up and just parked it there. He didn't pull into a parking spot to run up and get his daughter. When he came out, you will hear detectives told him to go back in. Prior to him coming out, they had begun to knock on the door of apartment 4. They had begun to announce police search warrant. When this gentleman came out, Detective Hankison in particular began to engage verbally with him, telling him to get back in, and continued to engage verbally with the gentleman. The detectives who were up at the door couldn't see Mr. Sarpe. They were too far under this deck landing. But Hankison was back here. He could very well see Mr. Sarpe and continued to engage with him to get back inside, get back. This escalated the situation. At that point, finally, Sarpe did go back in the apartment. At that point is when the knocking had been going on for minutes. No response. A decision was made after the gentleman went back inside to go ahead and breach the door. There were 3 hits, or I believe at least 3, possibly 4, with the ram against the door handle side of, can't see the door here, but the door handle side is on the right of the door to apartment 4. First hit did not make the breach. Second did not. And finally, third, I believe it was the third, possibly the fourth, that actually breached the door handle side at where the lock and the handle are on the right side, so that when the door opened, it went right to left. There was no knocking the door off the hinges. The door, as you saw in the earlier photograph, Exhibit 5, which was taken after the next morning, as you see, the door is perfectly still on the hinges. And you can't see, but inside the lock here, doorknob area is where it was breached. That caused it to open, staying on the hinges, opening up. During the time that, and this happened quickly. During the time that the breach was taking place, Detective Cosgrove, who had been behind these two who were at the door, moved up to cover Detective Nobles with the ram. He moved up in this direction to cover because the defendant was too busy engaging with Mr. Sarpe upstairs. So Cosgrove moved up to cover the guy with the ram, because the guy with the ram doesn't have any protection, has not got his gun. at the ready. So Cosgrove moved up, stepped up to cover, which put him in the line of fire. As soon as the door was breached, you will hear, as it opened up, it was pitch dark inside, and a shot came out the door immediately and hit Detective Mattingly, who was on the left side, but it was attempting to step in when he was hit in the leg, in actually the femoral artery. As soon as that shot rang out and hit Detective Mattingly, he and Detective Cosgrove, who had stepped up, after Detective Nobles breached the door with the ram, he spun out immediately. He spun out and was over here. So he was not in the doorway. Mattingly and Cosgrove, who had stepped up and were in the line of fire, and both returned fire after Mattingly was shot. You will hear that the defendant, Hankison, was not in the line of fire. And go back to 31A, I think, or 19, I guess 19. Yes. Hankison had been over here engaging with Sarpe. When the shots rang out, when the shot came from inside the apartment and hit Detective Mattingly, he ran over this direction, obviously behind this railing, and started shooting in a perpendicular, geometrically perpendicular to where the shot had come from inside the apartment. So those in the doorway were shooting, and this is west. This is south here. This is south. This is west, east, north. North would be this direction. So he's shooting from a south-north direction where the detectives who had been in the line of fire and returned fire from the doorway after the door was breached, and they were met with gunfire. They returned fire west-east, obviously, in the direction of where the shooter had shot from. And you will hear the shooter was at the end of the hallway. So he ran over here into actually the sidewalk. All of his casings were found in the parking lot. 10 shots were fired by the defendant. All 10 casings were found out here in the parking lot. None, of course, over here. All the casings in this breezeway that were located by the crime scene unit were casings that had been fired by the two detectives in the doorway, Cosgrove and Mattingly. Cody Etherton and Chelsea Napper were asleep in apartment 3 back here in this bedroom when they heard the banging.
Prosecution delivering the opening statement in the case against Brent Hankinson. We're going to pause it, pick it up right where we left off. Stay with us. Busy day here Here at Court TV, we're juggling two live trials. One is in Kentucky. That is the one against Brett Hankinson. He is the former officer in Louisville, Kentucky, who is facing 3 counts of wanton endangerment for his conduct, as the state says, during the warrant that was served on Breonna Taylor's apartment, which took the life of Breonna Taylor. Hankinson shot into a neighboring apartment, and he is facing those 3 charges. The opening statements we've been watching along together here. The other case, of course, is in Florida. Curtis Reeves, the popcorn movie murder trial. That case, that the mid-morning break is over. The judge is back on the bench, and you can watch that on CourtTV.com. We're streaming that trial online, and now let's get you right back to Louisville, right where we left off in the opening statements in the case against Brett Hankinson.
The breach, the ram. And Cody jumped up, you'll hear from him, and was walking toward the front door to see what was going on. As he got to this area, a bullet whizzed close to his head that he heard, and then saw debris, drywall, dust, where that bullet had come through. Bullets. He ran, he'll tell you, he hit the ground, crawled back to the bedroom. Chelsea Napper will testify. She woke up from sleep, and she is not she's a very heavy sleeper, but woke up immediately from these bangings and froze. She froze. She couldn't move. She couldn't, yet knowing her 5-year-old son was asleep in this bedroom. So Cody ran back, crawled back to the bedroom. They then were able to go get the child. As Cody came back out, the firing had stopped. The gunfire stopped. He came back out and then noticed the shattered glass of their patio door, and all the glass you'll see laying on the carpet. And you'll also hear there was a bullet, one of the bullets likely that hit above that door, the doorway. You'll see photo, and the bullet bounced back and landed, one of them landed in the carpet there, but one went all the way, did shatter the glass. They called 911. It was cold that night, so their door, which had been shattered, cold air was pouring in. You will hear that the radio, the defendant got on the radio after the shooting and called for patrol. You'll hear radio clips of him calling. Patrol car after patrol car came to the scene. Some of the patrol cars you will hear, some of the patrol officers went to the back of the building. And Cody Etherton was in some danger because at that point, no one knew that he was actually in a separate apartment. So there were guns pointed at him as he stood in the shattered and put his hands out this shattered glass and saw guns pointed at him from these patrol that came. So that's part of the circumstances that were created by the defendant in apartment 3. That's part of the circumstances that you will hear about. You will hear that the defendant gave a statement, and you will hear the statement to the Public Integrity Unit, which was called to investigate the scene, to process the scene, to interview all the detectives. You will hear that the defendant claimed that he saw into the doorway, the front door, and he claimed that he saw a shooter in there with an AR rifle in a combat position. And that he actually was standing here that he could see in, and that he returned fire when he saw that shooter with an AR rifle start shooting. You will learn that there was no AR rifle in apartment 4. There was one pistol, a Glock 43X 9mm, which had been used by the shooter inside, and it was found under a bed in the front bedroom. Under a bed in the front bedroom. Not the back bedroom, which was where Ms. Taylor and her boyfriend had been, but under a bed in the front bedroom, which window faces the parking lot. It's next to these doors, down just a little bit. One gun, one pistol, 9mm, and there was a casing that matched that 9mm found in the hallway, down the hallway, and there was one bullet which matched the shooter in the apartment's gun, the 9mm found under the bed. One bullet was later found out in the breezeway where Detective Mattingly had been shot. The bullet went through his leg and was found in the breezeway and was later identified as having been fired from the gun found under the bed in the apartment, the 9mm. There was never any AR long rifle. You will hear from officers who were there. You will hear from the SWAT team that came shortly after to clear the apartment. The SWAT team came to clear the apartment 4. And you will see some body-worn cameras that the SWAT team had. You will see that the defendant, you will see him in some of these body cameras that the SWAT team were wearing, because after the shooting, the officers were assisting Mattingly to get to the hospital. He was bleeding out. But the defendant was still covering or pointing his gun at this apartment. There were patrol officers also doing that. However, once the SWAT team arrived, the other officers did not attempt to go into the apartment. The defendant did. He came to the door and attempted to go into the apartment while the SWAT team was trying to clear. You will hear from firearms examiners who tested the casings and the bullets retrieved at the scene to the gun belonging to Hankison, and as I said, they determined that all 10 of the casings found in the parking lot were fired from his It's a Glock Model 22 .40 caliber service weapon. All 10 casings in that parking lot area were fired from his gun. You will hear from firearms instructors at Louisville Metro who will describe to you the training that takes place with officers at Louisville Metro. You will hear from an officer or a major who has knowledge of and will tell you about not only the firearms training, but the history of the training that this defendant has had in his career as a law enforcement officer. The major will describe some of the specific training courses, but you will actually have an entire transcript of the trainings that he has had since being a law enforcement officer, going all the way back to 1999, I believe, when he went to basic training. You will hear from some of the witnesses who were at the hospital following the shooting where John Mattingly had been taken. And the defendant went to the hospital. So you will hear from some witnesses who engaged with him at the hospital. You will see photographs that were taken by the crime scene unit inside apartment 4 as they process the scene. The body of Ms. Taylor will be in one of the photos at the end of the hallway. At the very end of the hallway, directly inside this door, looking straight ahead, is the hallway. And at the very end of the hallway, on the floor, is the body of Ms. Taylor, hit by return fire of those detectives in the doorway who were returning fire after Mattingly was shot. So I ask you to pay close attention to the testimony and keep in mind, what are the circumstances here under which this defendant acted? What are the circumstances which exhibited extreme indifference to human life? Starting with the gentleman upstairs. What was his reaction to that? How did that impact everything that followed? The circumstances of this crowded apartment building. Many, many people in this building. Starting with Mr. Sarpe and ending with Cody, Chelsea, and 5-year-old Zayden. Thank you all.
Okay, that's Barbara Whaley delivering the opening statement for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. You may recognize her. She prosecuted Kit Martin right here on Court TV. We're going to step aside, take a break. When we come back, we'll hear from the defense. Stay with us.